Hey, Plain Talk listeners, do you have a question, comment, or something you want us to discuss on the show?
We want to hear from you.
Leave a voicemail or send a text to 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? You know, I think I need to develop a podcast voice. I was listening to, I have this daily drive thing on Spotify, which I felt like, you know, I should use this, where it's going to play some news podcasts, kind of replicate the old listen to the more, radio news in the morning. And a New York Times podcast comes on with Michael Barbaro, who has, I swear to God, the most obnoxious podcast voice I've ever heard in my life. Like his cadence, where he's like, on this podcast, we're going to be discussing Matt Gaetz. It's like, he just does that the whole podcast, and I don't understand. And so, but part of me's wondering, obviously Michael Barbaro's got a lot more podcast listeners than we do, Chad. Maybe we need to do that with our cadence.
Rob, I want to make it clear. I have been using my podcast voice. This is the best I can do. So that, my normal voice is much, much, much worse. So this is the best I can do. It's the best rhythm I can provide.
It was funny when we had the guest hosts on, Corey Mock and Jessica Bell. One of the things they were saying is not wanting to listen to their episodes because they don't want to hear their own voice. I have to hear my own voice because I have to edit these things. And I'll tell you, it is the skeeviest thing I do on a regular basis. I hate it so much, hearing my own voice.
What's interesting is, so the three of you don't want to hear your voices. When I listen to these podcasts, I fast forward through everybody but me. I really enjoy the hot takes that I provide to the listeners, and I want to listen to them again.
Chad, there's a lot there to unpack, and we're going to get to that in the second part of the show, Chad's overweening narcissism. But for now, we're actually going to be talking to Adam Willis, who you might recognize as a former reporter for the company I work for, Forum Communications Company. He's now moved on, and these days he's writing stories for a lowly publication you may have heard of called Bloomberg. I'm kidding. Totally kidding. Adam, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
It's really good to be here. Thanks for having me.
We wanted to have you on. You had a lengthy profile piece about the debate over carbon capture in North Dakota, which for the time being, it's carbon capture is a question that is obviously much larger than the Summit carbon pipeline. But right now in North Dakota, that's kind of the epicenter of the debate. I think it's fair to say. And it's also sort of interesting because it's become also a sort of proxy for, I would say, the evolving politics, the realigning politics around a lot of issues. I think in the past, you would sort of think of a lot of North Dakotans, perhaps a majority of North Dakotans, as being sort of reflexively defensive of the coal industry, the oil and gas industry, and a lot of people who maybe that was true of in the past, maybe that's not so true of anymore. And anyway, a lot of weird stuff's happening in politics. Obviously, debates around energy are not immune to this. The headline of Adam's column, which I'll include a link to it in the show notes, is that North Dakota wants your carbon, but not your climate science. I think that was right. I should probably actually read that's the gist of it. It's about right. Now I have the link. You can go read it for yourself. Adam, what drew you to that story?
Sure. I mean, I have been kind of obsessed with this story for I think about 3 years now, a little bit more than 3 years now. So, as you said, I used to be a reporter for the Fargo Forum out of Bismarck. I think I wrote my first story about the Summit carbon pipeline in, I want to say it ran like November or December of 2021. And I actually felt like I'd waited a little bit too long. Like at that point, it was already sort of becoming a political storyline in North Dakota, although not one nearly as large as it is today. I didn't predict at the time that this would become sort of the like hyper polarizing issue across the entire region that it's turned into. Um, but I mean, what I wanted to get at with this story is the Summit Carbon Pipeline like fit very squarely in this big goal that Governor Burgum has, that you guys are familiar with and have talked about, I think, at some length. But this idea to make North Dakota carbon neutral by 2030, um, which he announced, I believe, also in 2021, earlier in the year. Um, and was this like extremely, extremely ambitious goal, by my read, much more ambitious than what even left-wing California says they want to do. They want to be net zero by 2045. So that stuck out to me as this like enormous goal, and the Summit pipeline sort of looked like the superhighway to Burgum's goal. That like this is how he wanted to get there. That you would pipe in CO2 from other places, and in doing so, like zero out or neutralize the emissions that are already coming from North Dakota's fossil fuel sectors. So, I mean, we can get into a lot of different things here, but I just thought it was fascinating that this is like this extremely ambitious uh, uh, proposal that is an enormous infrastructure endeavor, uh, that Burgum and I think a lot of folks in North Dakota see as a way to sort of sustain the existing industries there, which I think makes a lot of sense from a North Dakota perspective. But is as they're finding, I guess, is a very difficult one to pull off.
So Rob sort of joked that I find this topic fascinating before we started recording, but I do because, I'm old enough to remember 15 years ago when Byron Dorgan and Kent Conrad were talking about carbon capture as being the future for the coal industry, right? I mean, you had Democrats who were fighting for the future of the coal industry, and obviously the technology's come a long, long ways since 15 years ago. But I too remember the day that Burgum announced that carbon neutral by 2030 and say, is he being misquoted here? Because it was so ambitious. But what I find really fascinating about this is the politics, is the communities around it. You wrote about a Mr. Erickson, who's sort of a landman out selling, his friends and neighbors on the Summit pipeline, and then having one of his neighbors, Kurt Swenson, I think his name was, being completely against this. I find the sort of neighbors versus neighbors, sort of how this is affecting communities, is being really interesting. Can you talk some about what you're seeing in these communities? Because it does feel like it's driving a wedge between potentially the way you describe these two guys is I envision them being conservative, of a certain age, probably voting for all the same people, but they're barely on speaking terms because of this pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, I think your read on the relationship between Kurt Swenson and Jason Erickson is pretty spot on. There's not a whole lot of love lost there.
By the way, they're like neighbors or close to being neighbors. They're family history.
I think I put it into Google Maps. Like I think Kurt lives like 3 miles or so east of Jason, but in south of Beulah, that's neighbor.
It's neighbors in rural North Dakota.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and Kurt's not actually originally from North Dakota, but his wife is, and so his wife's side of the family. There's a long kind of history, as he relayed between their families. But the reason I was like so drawn to Jason and the dynamic that was going on there, is kind of like you said, Chad. Like this was sort of where the rubber meets the road, I guess, in terms of the energy transition and carbon capture specifically. That Jason is the guy who is tasked with going literally from door to door, and selling his neighbors on this idea of that I have to like imagine to a lot of people sounds like a, sort of a crazy concept of like burying millions of tons of CO2 underneath their land. I mean, it just sort of, to me, it's kind of sounds sci-fi. So I was fascinated by the fact that there is someone who is paid to do that, that was his whole job. And as I sort of focused on in the story, I mean, um, right before we started, Chad, you were saying that you've been fascinated by um, this this sort of weird alliance that has gotten a lot of talk around the Summit pipeline of environmentalists and folks who probably don't believe in climate change or say that they don't think it's not really a big issue for them. I was actually like a little bit more interested in the other side of the coin here because I think that dynamic has gotten a lot of play in media coverage over the last 2 years or so about the Summit pipeline. I wanted to write about the people who really believe in carbon capture and who believe that this is the solution for North Dakota and that this is how North Dakota is going to survive the energy transition. And in that way, Jason was really like he's the front line, he's the salesman for that idea. And in other ways, he's a regular guy. He's a rancher in Western North Dakota, south of Beulah. He's pretty media averse. I don't think he was super thrilled about being like the face of a national profile like this. He was super patient with me and all that, but I don't think that would have been his first choice. And he worked 20 years in the oil industry, so I think like he is sort of at the center of from a North Dakota perspective of like how the state is coming to terms with the energy transition and trying to find a way through it.
I'm one of those people that you just described who's a believer in this. I think it's yeah. I think we got to do something. I look at a lot. And maybe that's kind of the differentiation. I believe that I believe that the climate change is real. I think that the scope of it is maybe a different debate, but also I think that that Americans and humanity in general need to develop the technology to control our impact on the climate. And this is one of those technologies, I believe. And then, downstream from that, it's also very beneficial to North Dakota, which is gets a lot of prosperity from carbon heavy industries. So, but I wanted to ask you a question because it's some of the really interesting things here, talking politically, you interviewed Elliot Huggins, who was an organizer for the Dakota Resource Council, which is sort of a left of center environmental group in North Dakota. And he was talking about how one of their collaborators in the fight against the Summit carbon pipeline was claimed to have friends in the militia group, the Oath Keepers, right? Which is, I mean, that's about as far right as you get. And you also had, like you're talking about, some of the conspiracy theories about China and everything. It seems like sort of the quintessential horseshoe theory, right? Where you get far enough left, far enough right, and it's like they kind of find themselves in the same location. And my question though is what is it about this issue that is causing that? Because I look at North Dakota knows all about pipelines. We have thousands and thousands of miles of pipelines. Pipelines aren't new. Carbon pipelines aren't new. We've had a carbon pipeline operating in Western North Dakota for decades. And also you look at the people who are backing this, oil interests, gas interests, coal interests. They want, even though they're not, the Summit Pipeline's not really about those industries in North Dakota. It's about bringing carbon from ethanol plants to North Dakota, but they're very interested in carbon capture. They very much want, although I guess Harold Hamm's one of the backers of Summit. So
By a lot, put a lot of money into it.
yeah. So that's true. But what is it about this issue in particular that is sort of creating these strange bedfellows?
I think that's like I've been stumped by that. And I don't know if I'm right about this, but that's one of the things that I really wanted to try to tease out in this story. And one of the reasons why, like, there's a section of the story where I went down to this kind of convention in a town called Fort Dodge, Iowa, where I met a lot of the people who are like the real hardliners, like anti Summit pipeline. And it wasn't so much the environmentalists there. It was really the kind of right flank that's opposed to the pipeline and to carbon capture. I think it got on my radar originally because Jeff Magrum, Senator Magrum, told me it was happening, and I decided to drive down there for it. But I heard from a lot of the speakers there were sort of your standard, like, opposed to eminent domain, they're infringing on our property rights here. And to me, that wasn't a totally, like, satisfying finding, because it, like you're saying, like, we've seen this all the time with oil pipelines in North Dakota and other kinds of development that didn't stir this sort of controversy. So it was really like the guy I quote at the end of that section, a radio host in Nebraska named Trent Luce, y'all might be familiar with, but has kind of a following among conservatives and actively. Yeah, yeah. So he was the one who really got up and I thought, like, articulated this in the most crystal clear way, which is that he sees all of this as kind of a conspiracy that he traces back to the United Nations, all the way, this, like, sort of globalist land grab that is all premised on a completely false idea that we're facing climate catastrophe. He called it the big lie. So to me, I mean, I might be putting too much weight on that perspective, but I do think there's something to that, like, at least for the right sort of flank, not for the environmentalists so much, but for the right flank that's opposed to this, the reason that they're so entrenched on the issue is that to them this all comes back to climate change and doing something that they think just isn't necessary, that they're trying to lay all this pipe and also benefiting from a huge windfall of federal tax credits for something that they think is not an issue.
So, Adam, I want your opinion on the North Dakota, South Dakota dynamic here. I mean, it feels to me like this has been a big issue in North Dakota, but we haven't seen sort of electoral sort of falling out for people who are supportive of the pipeline.
Yeah.
In South Dakota, this last primary, there was, I think you reported 14 or 15 Republican incumbents who lost primarily because of this issue. Why do you think we're seeing more sort of political fallout from this in South Dakota versus North Dakota? Is it because in North Dakota we have Burgum being the chief cheerleader for this thing? I mean, it's just, when I talk to friends in South Dakota and they talk about this, the pipeline, and I work in education, and these are education folks who are like, we can't get folks to vote on anything but the pipeline in Republican primaries. What's the take there?
And also not just Burgum, but I mean, John Hoeven was instrumental in getting the 45Q tax credits across the line. He was talking about carbon capture alongside Byron Dorgan and Ken Conrad back when Hoeven was governor. Kevin Kramer was instrumental in 45Q tax credits as well in the United States. Our incoming governor, Kelly Armstrong, is a promoter as well. I mean, it's the top echelon of Republicans in North Dakota are pretty united about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has something to do with it. I would be interested in y'all's opinion on this myself, but my kind of theory has been, I do think there's something to the idea that there's sort of more energy literacy in North Dakota than there is in other parts of the region. South Dakota, like, the issues there are around farmland, and it's a relatively straightforward. They've got the benefits from that this would deliver for ethanol, but, like, for a lot of property owners there, this is an infringement without, like, they don't see a whole lot of, I guess, higher benefit to it. I do think that there's something, like, in North Dakota to just this idea that people are more familiar with the oil industry. They've seen things like oil pipelines come through before, but also that people are kind of familiar with carbon capture. Like, if you are looking at sort of a broad spectrum of, like, I guess I should say are relatively familiar with carbon capture. I don't think, like, everyone, average person in North Dakota really knows what it is, but much more so than in other parts of the region and certainly other parts of the country, you'll meet people who are sort of generally aware of the technology and some of the, like, arguments for it or against it. And I don't think that's as true in South Dakota. I do think, like, Rob, you've done reporting on this, I think, but, like, it was really interesting to me to see that all of these incumbents in South Dakota fell for reasons that might have had to do with the pipeline, whereas in North Dakota, it didn't seem to have the same political purchase. Like, I think some of the like sort of hard right folks that ran against the pipeline didn't succeed in North Dakota, right? Like it just didn't pan out in the same way. I don't know how much that has to do with Burgum. Like I wonder what y'all think of that, but I don't know if people are that sort of swayed by Burgum himself, or if in some ways that might work against it because of how some folks have sort of started to feel about Burgum in recent years. But I'd be curious what y'all think.
Oh, I've been tempted at times to sort of see it through a North Dakota lens. Like Jeff Magrum, I sometimes wonder how much of his opposition is rooted in the fact that how much he dislikes Doug Burgum. I mean, there is a personal feud between those two gentlemen,
Right.
and some of, and I don't know. I mean, I can't read this guy's mind, but I have perceived at least some of his opposition coming from just personal animosity towards Doug Burgum. So I don't know. And it does seem as though North Dakota politically, I mean, even outside of the pipeline issue, the sort of very, very hardcore MAGA has not had the sort of success in North Dakota that it's had maybe in some other red middle of the country states. And so I wonder if the pipeline issue is downstream from that.
Yeah, although I think South Dakota, before this primary, traditional Republicans have had a lot of success in primaries. And maybe it was just South Dakota's catching up to the last few cycles that everybody went down.
But you didn't when you look at in the Republican primaries in North Dakota, you really didn't see, like, I don't remember. I mean, Brandon Pritchard, outgoing state rep Brandon Pritchard, was sort of the organizer of the campaigns against Republicans incumbents in North Dakota, really didn't bring up the pipeline issue all that much. The place where it came up this election cycle the most, I perceived, was the U.S. House race, where in the Republican primary, Rick Becker and his opponents made an issue out of the fact that Julie Fedorchak was on the Public Service Commission, which just issued a permit, although she recused herself entirely from that process. But also her family has a lease from Summit. They're and not for the pipeline itself, but I think a well. So it was an issue during the primary. She won the primary handily, and it was an issue during the general election. Her Democratic opponent Trygve Hammer brought it up, and she was the #1 vote getter on the statewide ballot. She beat Trump by thousands of votes. So I don't know that the pipeline issue has ever had traction. Although I really like Adam's answer that the fact that North Dakota probably knows more about pipelines, the general public knows more about the oil and gas industry, even though Summit specifically isn't that related to oil and gas. We know pipelines, we know these issues. And also, I mean, Project Tundra, we've been hearing about it for years and years. One of the largest carbon capture projects in the nation, in the world, really, is just north of Bismarck at Coal Creek Station.
Well, this is why in the story I kind of juxtaposed that, those quotes from Trent Luce come shortly after an interview with Representative Anna Novak, who, like, I kind of felt like spoke for a lot of the message I was hearing in coal country, which is Anna does not believe that humans are causing climate change. She says that pretty straightforwardly, but she doesn't even, she wishes that North Dakota didn't have to pursue carbon capture. She says she doesn't think it's necessary from a climate perspective. She doesn't like that this is sort of relying on all of this federal subsidy. But she feels like North Dakota is backed into a corner, and the arguments over climate change are closed now. And if North Dakota wants to survive, if her communities want to survive, then they have to find some way to kind of meet the demands of the energy transition. So I wonder, she's certainly she's a lawmaker. She's plugged into these conversations, but I do wonder, how many folks kind of fall into a similar camp as her.
Yeah, I think Anna Novak's right. Not about climate change being real or not, but when the world has decided that something has to be done about carbon, this seems like the best solution for the coal, ethanol, and oil industry to keep moving forward.
I think that pragmatism, where a lot of them are realizing if we want to continue to sell our coal or our coal-fired electricity or our oil or our gas, we have to find a way. I mean, the market's demanding reduced carbon. So we have to, whether we like it or not, it's like we have to deliver it.
There's a quote from Senator Dale Patton, that got struck from my story, but I think he articulates that argument where he says, for years, North Dakota's been selling steaks, and the rest of the country is saying it doesn't want steak anymore; it wants hamburgers. So if North Dakota wants to stick around, it better figure out how to start making hamburgers.
Strike that.
I thought it was good. I know. I thought it was a good line.
Editor's good for it. Adam and I are going to
commiserate over stories. Yeah.
So this sort of leads up to my biggest frustration with this whole conversation. I don't understand why environmentalist groups are just hell no on this thing. Because again, if we want to get to a carbon neutral world, we're going to need some sort of transition here. I mean, so could you talk? I mean, I know DRC likes to think of themselves as not an environmental group, more of a landowners group. But do you like? We don't have a lot of true Sierra Club type environmentalists in North Dakota to fight against this. But when you were talking to sort of people who maybe looked at this not from the landowners, right, but on the pipelines, we should get rid of all fossil fuels. Do they really see that there's a viable future, a viable energy solution where we don't have fossil fuels? I mean, is that where DRC is at?
I don't want to speak for DRC specifically, but I mean, I appreciate the question because like I don't want to sound like this is like an easy sort of answer here in this conversation. I mean, there are very real and I think very legitimate debates going on about carbon capture and to what extent we should be investing in it. And, I wanted to write this story from the perspective of like the carbon capture true believers as I've kind of been thinking of it, because I think that's the story that hasn't really been told. There's been so much sort of news coverage of the dissenters here. But that's not to say that like this is an easy answer from sort of a technological perspective or from a climate perspective. I think one of the challenges with discussions about carbon capture is from a technical perspective, it's extremely nuanced. So you have like capturing CO2 off of an ethanol plant is deep and pretty easy. You get like a really pure stream of CO2 that comes off of an ethanol biorefinery. And that makes it really easy to capture. Summit's going to make money hand over fist if they can get this through. Doing it at Milton Young for Project Tundra is a very different question. It's at this point, like in some cases, looks kind of prohibitively expensive. It is a huge energy suck on the plant itself. So you end up getting like a third of the energy out of the power plant than you otherwise would, because you got to power the carbon capture apparatus itself. And then you don't even get to zero out all the emissions from the plant. I mean, I think Minn Kota told me that they would be able to capture about 74%. So if we're talking about a zero carbon electric grid, you're not getting there. And I think that like, again, I didn't want to come to sort of a conclusion in the story of we should be making these investments, we shouldn't be making these investments. But I do think it's a hard question. And with some of the coal plants in North Dakota, you've got really old plants that are going to have to retire, within the next 2 decades, whether or not, there's carbon capture attached to them or not. There's also the case, and not to go down a rabbit hole, but there's the case that like, if you can prove carbon capture works on a coal plant like Milton Young, we're not going to be doing this like a ton across the country at coal plants in the United States. China, on the other hand, is building coal plants. And so maybe you sort of prove out the technology on a plant in North Dakota, and you have other countries around the world that are actually ramping up some of their reliance on coal power, who can replicate that and find ways to do it in a more climate friendly way down the line. So I think that like we risk sort of flattening the discussion if we just sort of carbon capture good, carbon capture bad. It really depends very specifically on the project you're talking about, and the type of energy source you're talking about, the type of industry that you're talking about.
Yeah, because also, I mean, there's some where it's just capturing carbon out of the air too, right? I think in Iceland there's Adam also corrected me. The Project Tundra's at Milton Young, not Coal. I think I said Coal Creek Station. I don't know why. Yeah. Coal Creek Station also has I think they're also developing a carbon capture component.
which was a big part of rescuing the plant, right? When
Yeah,
then when Burgum's administration successfully rescued Coal Creek, it was partly because they figured they were gonna
right.
have it.
I conflated the two. Adam, thank you so much for coming on. Once again, the article is at Bloomberg. It is well worth your time to read. If you're wondering what all this carbon capture stuff is about, and I do like, because I do appreciate that it does, and I think that's a natural, it's sort of a natural bias in media. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. So a lot of times we end up spending a lot of time covering the people who are against things and maybe not covering as much the people who are for things. So I really appreciated that perspective, because I think it brought something new to the debate. The headline is North Dakota wants your carbon, but not your climate science. I'll have a link to that in the show notes of this. So if you want to click over, please read that. Adam, thank you for your time.
Really great. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcast.
Well, that was a fascinating conversation. I'm not lying. It's a good article. And I am really glad that he took the perspective of people who are for it. Like, I don't think there's enough talk about why is this a good thing? Because it is in some ways a little bit of a moonshot. And I guess I can explain my own support for it. I don't really like the idea that the federal government is basically creating a market for carbon out of nothing. But I also think it's, in order to really get the sort of investment we need to capture carbon, it's an externality. And so we had to do something to make it profitable to capture it, to do something with it. Because I don't think the other side, where it's all just stick and we're all just restricting what we can do, that's a recipe for driving up energy costs and making life more expensive for Americans, which I don't think we want to do either. So this is a middle way. I'm not exactly that happy with it. And also I think the mistake we make sometimes is by thinking, well, if it doesn't solve the emissions problem, then we shouldn't do it. And I think that's an example of Adam, and I don't think this was his intent at all, but he was talking about, like, with the coal plants. I think he said North Dakota was saying that they can only capture about 75% of carbon. It was kind of like, oh, they're not really, getting to 0%. Okay, well, the reality is we can't power our nation on wind turbines and solar panels. We're going to have to get power from elsewhere. Coal is super cheap. And if you can reduce the carbon emissions of a coal plant by 75%, that's a W in my book.
Yep. So I thought his last answer to my question when I was complaining about environmentalists on this issue was really, really good. I mean, he basically said, you can't dumb down this conversation to carbon capture being good, carbon capture being bad, because it depends on what carbon you're capturing and where it's being produced. I think that's a really, really important nuanced approach, that we can't just say no to everything or yes to everything. And I'll tell you the reason why I've been intrigued by carbon capture is somebody who wants the coal industry and oil industry to continue to succeed in North Dakota. This is a way for them to continue to succeed in North Dakota, regardless of who's the administration in Washington, right? They'll continue to be able to produce this product, produce the revenue for our schools and for our local communities, and create good paying jobs for North Dakotans. So I think that I don't want us ever to be, hell no, we won't do that because it's not perfect, because we're never going to get to our environmental goals if we don't start taking incremental steps. I also get frustrated when we say, well, what about China? Let's fix our stuff. And I thought Adam's point, well, let's show this technology, then we can sell it to China to do all these different things. So
India, which frankly has a similar problem, or anywhere else in the world. And by the way, one of the things too is we tend to talk about these technology advancements in very static terms. Right. And one thing I learned and took to heart during the early years of North Dakota's oil boom is how the impact of fracking wasn't static. It was a moving target. We got better at it over time, where you saw the efficiency of the wells increase over the term of just by doing it, by Well, okay, we're going to start fracking in North Dakota, and then we're going to develop new ways of doing it, new technologies, new techniques, and we got better at it. And the price that a barrel of oil needed to be to make a well, and granted, that's a moving target depending on where you're drilling in North Dakota. But I mean, basically, we were driving down how high oil prices need to be in order for oil to be productive, oil production to be lucrative in North Dakota. And it was because we got better at frac. And I think the same thing could be true of carbon capture. The more we do it, the better we're going to get at it. And the applications aren't just for ethanol plants or coal plants or oil wells or, it could be cement factories. It could be just about anything. If we could figure out, or just setting up places that suck the carbon just out of the raw air, which is part of it as well. Maybe not all of this stuff's going to work. Maybe not all of it's practical, but we make this mistake where we think we got to have one silver bullet solution that solves all our problems and gets us to zero. It's not going to work that way. We're going to have lots of different solutions over lots of different application areas. And the more we do these things, the better we're going to get at it. This is why I am a cheerleader. And also I look at a lot of the arguments against it. If you're an environmentalist and you're just upset because this is going to help the coal industry and you'd rather us get our energy from, solar panels or something, I'm sorry. That's not a compelling argument to me. We know how to use coal. Coal's cheap. Let's figure out how to do it. And on the other side of it, if your argument is that this is a UN conspiracy theory to steal land from property, I don't find that compelling. That is not a compelling argument to me.
I don't know if you noticed you started to whisper when you said that. Were you worried that somebody's listening to you when you started talking about it?
No, it's just when I talk about conspiratorial things, I want to sound conspiratorial. Like I spring to somebody in a dark colored room. The United Nations is the one doing this to us.
Well, and China's got a 100-year plan, right? And they're in year 70.
Don't get me wrong. The Chinese communists absolutely have it in for America. There's no question about that. I understand that. They're doing all sorts of nefarious things, but also, it's sometimes just, sometimes it's not a conspiracy. Sometimes the thing just is what it is.
We also just elected a friend of theirs to be president of the United States. But anyway, one of the things that I found most fascinating is the community aspect of this. I thought Adam did a really great job of, pointing out this is where the rubber meets the road. It's this Jason Erickson going to his neighbors. And there's a movie that came out a while ago with Matt Damon about fracking in Pennsylvania, where he was a landsman, and it looked like
I loved that movie because John Krasinski turned out to be the bad guy, like the environmental. It's for once Hollywood didn't make the oil and gas industry the bad guy. It was the environmentalists all along.
All the whole time, yeah. So, but that's what I sort of envisioned when he was talking about this, this farmer rancher type and, a community member and trying to sell this, I think is interesting. I also think, Doug Burgum just got a really big appointment to the Interior Secretary of Interior, and then this new chairmanship of energy or whatever. And there's a lot of environmental groups that are upset about him getting that. I think the fact that he's put down the gauntlet and said carbon neutral by 2030, which is more than Gavin Newsom and all these other people. And again, if we're for being carbon neutral, we should be for being carbon neutral. We shouldn't say, but you can only do it this way, or you can only do it this way. If CO2 is warming the planet and causing all these problems, we should figure out the fastest way to become carbon neutral.
We keep talking about all these political realignments that are happening in partisan politics. I think some of it needs to happen in like issue politics as well. And environmentalism is one. Like you can't just be knee-jerk against oil and gas and coal anymore. And again, it gets back to, if we can reduce the carbon emissions for a coal plant over the next 20 years by 75%, take the W. That is a win.
Yeah. Unless we somehow figure out how to use batteries or something like that to store. But we're not there yet. And people expect to turn on their lights and do it cheaply. And until the consumers will not accept anything differently. So we have to also work within that reality of bringing down CO2 emissions while keeping energy cheap and reliable.
Look at the last election. The most potent argument that Republicans had across demographics, everything else, was inflation. Was the fact that it is getting more and more expensive. So now imagine what happens to prices when you start driving up the price of energy. Because I'm not just talking about the electricity bill. for, my lights, right, in your house or running your air conditioner or what have you. I'm talking about the electricity bill or what Netflix has to charge more because they need to operate their data centers, or what, the price of products in the store cost because the factories that make them or the companies that transport them have to pay higher, utility bills. It ripples across the economy. So there's got to be some pragmatism that has got to set in among environmentalists. And I think they would, because what we were talking about as well, there is a pragmatism that has set in among the Anna Novaks of the world, who works in the coal industry and represents a legislative district that is in coal country. And she's not, okay, you haven't won her over on climate science, fine, but she's willing to play ball with you because she recognizes certain, the left has to come meet people like Anna Novak at the table.
So, and I think that's a really, really good point, because 10 years ago, my frustration was the coal industry wasn't willing to recognize that reality, right? They were saying, hell no, we don't want to change anything. We don't want to do anything differently, keep everything the same. They have moved.
Right.
And Anna Novak's a good example of that. I mean, even she doesn't believe in climate change. Okay. But she believes that the economic reality is, if her communities out in coal country are going to stay strong, we need to do something about CO2. And so I agree with you. I used to say, both sides have to figure out how to move. I actually think the fossil fuel industry's moved a little bit here, and to their benefit, right? I mean, if CO2 works, it's going to be a cash cow for them, but I don't blame them.
Why? But why is that also a bad thing? I mean, by the way, that's the whole point of like 45Q tax credits, is provide a profit incentive. I think a lot of people, I think a lot of the environmental messages, I think, fall flat because you're asking people to sacrifice for nebulous reasons. I mean, it's like, do it for the good of the world, save the planet. And yes, we should all want to save the planet, but I'll tell you what's a lot more effective is do this to lower your electrical bill. The environment hasn't been very good at doing that. Like, make it pragmatic for me. How does this benefit me?
Yeah. And it's hard for people to sort of wrap their heads around, right? I mean, I believe strongly that something's happening with our climate. I think storms are getting stronger. I mean, we're seeing that all over. But I think people have a tough time wrapping their head around my role in that. Like, I can do anything about that. They're like, well, it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't, so I'm thinking about my electricity bill and whatever. Like, so I agree with you. I also get frustrated. You talked about the tax credits for the coal and oil industry this is probably around more ethanol than those other things. But, in fossil fuel industries have historically been very, very critical of wind and like those other subsidies. But all energy, all the above energy, everybody gets their government handout. Yeah. Everybody gets their government handout.
I think the one distinction that I would make is that the oil and gas industry and the coal industry have never gotten a production tax credit. They have never been paid to just produce electricity, unlike wind. And the degree to which we started putting our finger on the scale for wind energy at a time when wind energy wasn't ready to provide and still isn't ready to carry baseload energy, I think was a mistake. And we are retreating from some of that. I think some of that criticism. But listen, no industry, no person in the United States makes it without support from the government. We live in a society, no industry, no person is an island. And I'm willing to do that. I would argue that some government incentives are better than others. And the 45Q stuff, again, we're trying to create a market for a waste product, which is hard to do, which is different. I mean, when you're subsidizing wind, you're paying them to produce the thing that they produce. You don't have to subsidize coal. It's a good product. The problem is this externality that it creates that we have to do something about.
Yeah, but so at the end of the day, it's the coal and oil industry that will benefit financially,
and the ethanol industry, and a lot. I mean, there's a lot of industries about this. I mean, and again, it's easy to forget that the Summit Carbon Pipeline isn't about coal or oil. But ultimately, it's about coal. Storing carbon is important, and they want to see this project be successful for that reason. And the technology of capturing carbon across all the spectrum of different applications is important. And I mean, again, I am all about humanity fixing this problem. I don't like the solutions that involve, like, humans have to lower their quality of living in order to save the planet. I don't think that's an effective approach. I am for humanity should use its inventiveness and its ingenuity to control its environment. I am for that.
See, I am for individuals making those choices. It's just not a reality of something that's going to happen. So therefore, we have to do technology and those kind of things. Get everybody to say, hey, I'm going to do better and that will solve the problem and we don't have to go through. That's ideal. It's just not, it's utopian. It's seal.
I just think it's really tough to tell people like you have to walk around your house in your swimsuit in August because it's not flipping hot. People are not going to do that.
We have an expectation in this country of turning on the light switch and having the power and not paying much money for it. That's never going to change. That is never going to change. So we have to figure out the difference.
Well, and you're not going to win a political argument by asking people to go backwards on their quality of life. You just
for God's sakes, the number one issue is the price of eggs because people didn't want to pay more money for eggs.
Well, but again, inflation was, and
no, for sure. I mean, I'm dumbing it down to eggs, but I mean, like, it did come down.
I have 2 kids. I've been feeling the hits of inflation. I've been enjoying it. I would like to have a little extra money and maybe take an extra camping trip with my kids every year or put a little extra money in their college savings accounts. So inflation, I mean, these are real issues. And again,
And Rob, what wasn't a good response is, well, we're doing better than other countries.
Yeah. No.
Right? I mean, that's just not an issue when people are looking at, I mean,
especially not with Americans, especially not with Americans who are used to being at the
person of countries. I don't care about that. I care about what's happening to me.
Oh, we're doing better than Romania. Well, great. I don't live in Romania.
Their eggs are out of this world.
All due respect to I'm sure it's a beautiful country. In fact, it is a beautiful country. I would like to visit Romania one day. Not insulting Romanians, but I don't care what's happening in Romania on a day-to-day basis. I care a great deal what's happening in North Dakota in the United States of America. And again, if your argument is we have to go backwards, and also like the sanctimony sometimes, where I love watching Hollywood celebrities fly into North Dakota on their private airplanes to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline and to oppose all this energy that makes life cheap for me. A 15% increase in the cost of living doesn't hurt Mark Ruffalo that much. It sure hurts me a lot. And I think there's a disconnect in that messaging.
If you think that I'm going to join you in taking a shot at the Hulk on this show, you are sadly mistaken.
I love Mark Ruffalo, the actor. I think he's great. Searchlight is one of my favorite. It's a journalism movie. He's fantastic in it. He's fantastic in the Marvel. I like Mark Ruffalo a lot. I detest Mark Ruffalo's politics. I think they're obnoxious.
Again, I'm not willing to take on the Hulk.
Okay, fair enough.
Let's
segue from the Hulk to Cory Mock, because that's an obvious and logical progression of this cause.
It's transition.
It's is from the Hulk to this twee outgoing legislator.
Let's be clear. Are you and Cory on speaking terms again? Because I did notice that you made his whole appointment about you, which is speaking narcissism, which we started this with.
We are back on speaking terms. It was just we weren't friends for the rest of that day. So we're friends again. Cory appointed to and that whole thing was about Cory getting appointed to Kelly Armstrong. So he didn't tip me off about it, which I did think that was a fun story. I liked it. I do feel like there was something intentional about Kelly Armstrong doing it and picking a Democrat. I think it's a healthy thing. I like it. I'm a little surprised at the degree of backlash from some quarters.
That he's getting on.
Rob, if Kelly would have appointed some Republican that nobody had heard of, nobody knows what happens in the IT department unless there's a huge problem. I thought Kelly's response of there's not a partisan solution to the IT needs of the state and that Cory knows this budget or whatever. I hate the reflexive nature of people who are just like, they're a Democrat, therefore they're incompetent. They're the other party, so therefore they're incompetent. There's nothing partisan about IT at the state of North Dakota. And good for Kelly for recognizing that. I mean, we'll see if Cory ends up being a great pick or not, but one thing that should not disqualify him is the fact that he was a Democratic legislator. That's stupid.
Yeah, I thought it was really stupid. And I say that, obviously, I think we're both biased. We know Corey. We're friends with Corey. Or I am. I don't know if you are. Maybe you don't like Corey.
Or, oh, great. We're going to have a text thread after this thing. Of course I like Corey.
Okay. I wanted to make sure. I didn't want to assume.
Well, what if I didn't? Like, how that conversation went? Yeah, you're right, Rob. I hate Corey Mock. That SOB.
That son of a gun. I mean, we are a little biased, but again, I like it. I want to get back to the idea where Democrats aren't like bad people, or vice versa. Republicans aren't, bad people. Because let's be honest, if we had elected Merrill Pepcorn and Merrill Pepcorn had gone out and picked a Republican lawmaker to be in his cabinet, there'd be elements of the North Dakota Democratic Party or liberals in North Dakota upset about it.
For sure. Well, mind you, it's been 40 years of Democrats waiting for an appointment. So maybe
40 years.
Maybe
it hasn't quite been. It's been 34 years.
Yeah, what an exaggeration.
Yeah.
Yeah. But now, with all that being said, Trump also appointed 2 Democrats who I think are woefully unqualified, in Robert Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard for the positions that they were picked for. I mean, goodness gracious.
Yeah. That is so weird. Like, one of the few things that I thought, and that I really gave a lot of credit to the Trump administration for, from 2016 to 2020, was the degree to which they facilitated the development of the COVID-19 vaccines. Like, I really, good job. Like, you did it right. You made the funding available. You made the right regulatory moves, and we got I mean, it was almost like something out of a movie where it's like we're suffering through a pandemic, and it's like the scientists, right? That's always the movie thing where it's like they make the vaccine and then the movie.
Yeah, and they did it really fast, and yeah.
Yeah, like we kind of did that in real life. And I mean, listen, however else you might feel about Donald Trump, his administration deserves credit for that. And then they go and they hire the most notorious anti-vax person in America to be the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. I don't understand the politics of that. You have I mean, Donald Trump is going to be very good for the oil and gas industry in North Dakota. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was in North Dakota vociferously advocating against the Dakota Access Pipeline. What are these politics?
So the other thing that I think is interesting,
and by the way, that's not me being partisan. That's me like not understanding how you bridge the gaps in those issues.
And he's pro-life. He's anti-choice. I mean, like if you're a Republican and this guy's your Health and Human Services, I mean, where do they line up?
Donald Trump is pro-choice. Personally, pro-choice. I don't think he cares about abortion. I think he cares about it insofar as it's been a useful vehicle for his political aspirations.
So here's another thing that's really been jarring to me in the last week is Matt Gaetz, whatever the hell his name is, has now dropped out because he's been accused of sexual assault. You have the Department of Defense
Pete Heggs
person. Yeah, the Fox News guy who was paid off somebody who accused him of sexual assault. And there's now a rather long police report that's been released about that incident. You've got Linda McMahon, who's now is part of a lawsuit against what are the ringside boys or whatever who were sexually assaulted when she was in. It's just like appointment after appointment after appointment has these like literally are involved in sexual assaults. I mean, it's like it's so many of these things. I mean, not to mention the president-elect has these issues. I mean, it's shocking to me the terrible vetting that's being done. And if it's not terrible vetting, they're saying that they're okay with what Matt Gaetz did.
It's terrible vetting. I think they're aware of it. I think they don't care. And I think
what's saying to women in this country, right? I mean, that you sexually assault somebody, you rape somebody, whatever. And you know what? Promotion.
This is a country that just elected Donald Trump, though, too, who has his own long list of problems in this area. And part of me, because I don't want you to think that I'm doing whataboutism here, but part of what really frustrates me is I looked at what was done to Justice Brett Kavanaugh, during his hearings, where the accusation against him was very nebulous. It was something that happened at a teenage party decades and decades prior. There was very little in the way of substantiation. There was there was one witness, and it was the woman making the accusation. There was nothing. Democrats turned that into he's a rapist. And that I thought was fantastically unfair. Now, that situation is different from this because with Matt Gaetz, we have a mountain of evidence. Now, and I understand the Department of Justice didn't press charges. I'm beginning to wonder why. And I suspect they didn't press charges because they were afraid of political blowback. Frankly, I think there was political bias there, but it didn't run against Matt Gaetz. It ran for him. And you look at Hegseth. This happened years before. I mean, nobody knew that he was going to be a Department of Defense pick, right? That police report happened years before this, but it is a very detailed report. So, I mean, you can't say that it was somebody just coming out of the woodwork to make an accusation because after the fact, it wasn't that. I think that was very much true in Kavanaugh, but I think there is some, and again, not whataboutism, and I'm not excusing what's going on with Trump. And even RFK Jr., by the way, had an affair with which was consensual apparently, but he has his own, history, not with sexual assault, but infidelity, some Congress case. I guess I don't know that much about those, but anyway, I'm not excusing any of that, but the degree to which some of this, like accusations of sexual assault, has been weaponized, I think some of the fact that voters don't care about this stuff, I think, is backlash to the Me Too stuff, which in many ways was needed, but in many ways got out of hand.
Yeah. So I think all that is fair. In the Kavanaugh stuff, I think you are right. When the accuser comes after he's been appointed, when he's already gone through he was a federal judge,
and there's nothing else to corroborate. There's no police report. There's no other witnesses who were at the party who can say, "Oh yeah, we saw it happen." Nothing.
But I think you're right that these are different because even the Pete Hegseth, is it Hegseth? Yeah. It was a while ago, but it was only 2017. And not like you were 17. Yeah, it's not like he was a 19-year-old kid. I mean, this is an adult at that time, and the police report came out at that time, and he chose to write a check, right? I mean, generally in this,
write a check, and then his lawyer saying on the record that he wrote the check to protect his Fox News career, which is a stunning admission.
Yeah,
remarkable.
But I also think there's a lot of judgment sort of in Christian conservatives of people's lifestyles, unless you're one of us. I mean, it goes back to the Kevin Kramer now said he wouldn't have voted for Matt Gaetz. That's easy to say after he drops out that you weren't going to do that. But there's a lot of judgment of people's lifestyles and who they love and what bathrooms they use and all those other things. But somehow sexual assault ends up being okay. And people get, and the Hegseth, he's also not qualified for the job in addition to being,
it's not as neither was Matt Gaetz. RFK Jr. is not qualified to be the head of the Health and Human Services.
And we talked about it on Wednesday. I think we both believe whoever wins the election gets to appoint their people, as long as they're in the guardrails of normal American politics, which Doug Burgum
and even
Marco Rubio say are.
Even competency to a certain level, I don't know. We elected the president to make judgments. If he judges this person fit, I think the confirmation process is a lot about fraud, ethical problems. That's what the confirmation, competence questions. We elected the president of the United States. So,
what scares me is you've got Vivek and Elon Musk who are now going to kick all the federal bureaucrats out as well. And so you're going to have these incompetent political appointees who are really in charge of things. And there's not going to be the sort of safety nets you'd often have from bureaucrats. So we'll see how it goes. So I'm trying to use the thoughts of young Evan Oban the day after the election. Maybe this time he'll make better choices. up to this point, Evan's been wrong.
Yeah.
He's not making better choices.
You know, in another context, the Doge thing, the Department of Government Efficiency, would be exciting to me because I do think there's work in that area to be done. There is real bloat in the federal government. We really could look at streamlining some things and maybe ending some duplicative things. I think the problem is the people heading it up are not serious things. And I was laughing because you're the richest man in the world, Elon Musk. You're Vivek Ramaswamy, former presidential candidate, who's obviously, done very well for himself. Two very successful people who are now obliged to work with former yoga instructor Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm just kind of laughing about it. Like, here's your reward for helping Donald Trump win Pennsylvania, for literally paying voters millions and millions of dollars, which I'm sure is a rounding error to Elon Musk. Whatever. He doesn't care. It's throwaway money. But now you get to work with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Enjoy, gentlemen, because she's a crazy person.
Yep. I don't know what to say to that. It's sort of like the conversation about Burgum and Marco at the first cabinet meeting, like looking around saying, who the hell are these people and how do we end up in the same room as them?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know about stuff like that, but I mean, listen, I want to get back to the sort of American leadership that is focused on good ideas. I mean, if there's a unifying theory here, is that how often we kind of let ideology and sort of entrenched politics get in the way of like trying things. And I really have so much hope for Kelly Armstrong because I think he is so pragmatic. I really think he's going to make some good decisions. He's going to be conservative, but I think he's not afraid if a Democrat has a good idea. I don't think he's afraid of pretending like he didn't hear it or that they can't do it. I think he's going to do excellent. And with carbon capture, again, I think it's an idea worth trying across multiple applications. And we got to get past sort of these hidebound political debates around stuff like that.
So in fear of being too agreeing with you too much, I agree with both of those takes. I mean, I think, one of the things that I like about Kelly is, first of all, he's so damn accessible. I mean, to everybody. But secondly, he's honest. I don't know how many meetings I've had with him over the years where he said, I disagree with you. And that's it. It's not that he says I'm evil or I'm wrong or whatever. He's like, I disagree with you. And that's okay to be disagreeable. And there's other times where I say something's like, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's what I want in a governor. He's going to do things that I don't like.
Yeah.
But guess what? I think he's doing everything for the right reasons.
Well, as we'll put a pin in it there, because that's my new catchphrase. Apparently, that I didn't even know was a catchphrase until Corey Mock pointed it out that I say it all the time. Yeah, mocked me, and now I'm like self-conscious about it. I say it, and I'm like, oh my god, why did I say that again? So we're gonna put a pin in it there. And next week, on next week's show, we're going to be that'll be the show right before Thanksgiving. We're going to have Sean Cleary on talking about a lot of ideas he has for sort of reforming, campaign reporting and stuff like that. He just managed Julie Fedorchuk's campaign. And obviously, he's a state lawmaker himself, so manages his own campaigns. And I have some interesting ideas, I think, about that. I think there's some things we can do to make that process more transparent, more accountable. I think it'd be beneficial to us all. So we'll be talking with him about that. And then Friday, I don't know if we've decided if we're going to have a Friday show next week or not. I really don't know what we're doing.
You tell me where to be and I'll be there, Rob.
I think we might
I think we should skip it. Who's going to want to be on a podcast with you and I on a Friday?
These people need something to listen to while they're doing their Black Friday shopping. So we got to give the public what they want. And clearly what they want is two chubby bearded men talking about politics while they're shopping for deals on air fryers
and talking about what we ate the day prior. I think that should be the debrief. One thing that I thought was interesting when you're saying who Sean Cleary is, you left out the fact that he is my state senator, which I think in his bio is Oban state senator.
Chad Oban. I don't know how to say it. Like Chad Oban is my constituent. This is my claim to fame.
Yeah, I think it's in his Twitter bio.
You think so? Okay, probably.
And if it's not Sean, get it in there, buddy.
Wow. Okay, well, we really are going to end because nobody's going to want to listen to more of that. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.